We look up at the night sky and see a sanctuary of silence. We see a serene black vault, dusted with diamonds, a place of peace that floats far above the petty squabbles and violences of our lives on earth. We trace the shapes of lions, crabs, and scales, and we read our horoscopes in the morning paper, hoping for a vague promise of romance or a warning about our finances, treating the zodiac like a harmless parlor game or a soft superstition to pass the time. But this modern comfort is a lie, a sanitization of a much darker, bloodier, and more visceral reality that has been hanging over our heads for thousands of years. If you could truly read the sky as the ancients did, you would not see a peaceful gallery of stars. You would see a crime scene. You would see a celestial mausoleum where the Greeks pinned their most traumatic memories, their most jagged betrayals, and their most terrifying monsters, freezing them in light so that they could never be forgotten. The practice was called catasterism, the art of translating flesh and blood into fire and geometry, and it was never done lightly. It was a final judgment, a way to memorialize the moments where the boundary between men and gods shattered with catastrophic results. Tonight, we are going to peel back the layers of pop culture astrology to reveal the raw, beating heart of the ancient zodiac, not as a wheel of fortune, but as a collection of ghost stories that have survived the collapse of empires. We will walk the circle from the golden fleece that demanded a child's murder to the twin fish that fled a monster capable of killing the gods themselves. But to understand the end, we must start at the bloody beginning with the animal that leads the charge, the golden ram of Aries. Before there was a constellation, there was a kingdom on the brink of collapse, and a stepmother with a heart as cold as the void between stars. The story of Aries does not begin in the heavens, but in the gritty, desperate dirt of Boeotia, in the Bronze Age palace of King Athamas. This was a world where the favor of the gods was the only currency that mattered, and where a single bad harvest could turn a king into a beggar. Athamas had married a cloud nymph named Nephele, a being of mist and divinity who gave him 2 children, a boy named Phrixus and a girl named Helle. But the desires of kings are fickle, and Athamas cast his divine wife aside for a mortal woman named Ino, and in doing so he invited a darkness into his house that would stain the history of Greece forever. Ino was not merely jealous. She was a master of political sabotage and psychological warfare. She looked at the children of the previous wife not as stepchildren, but as threats to her own bloodline, obstacles that needed to be removed with surgical precision. She did not hire an assassin, for that was too clumsy, too obvious. Instead, she waged war on the earth itself. The legends tell us that Ino secretly corrupted the seed grain of the kingdom, roasting the wheat before it was sown, so that when the planting season came, the earth remained barren. Imagine the creeping horror of that spring, the farmers watching the skies, the king pacing his halls as the granaries emptied and the people began to starve, their ribs showing through their skin, their eyes turning hollow. Ino had manufactured a famine to force the king's hand. When the desperation reached its peak, King Athamas did what any ruler of his time would do. He sent messengers to the oracle at Delphi to ask the gods how to lift the curse. But Ino had anticipated this. She bribed the messengers, corrupting the holy word of Apollo with mortal gold. When they returned, they did not speak the truth. They delivered a lie that Ino had placed in their mouths, a lie so horrific it froze the blood of the court. The oracle, they claimed, had said the famine would only end if the king sacrificed his own son, Phrixus, upon the altar of Zeus. This is the moment where the machinery of tragedy grinds into motion. We must pause to consider the psychological weight of this. A father, pushed by the starvation of his entire people, convinced by a fabricated command from heaven, agreeing to slice the throat of his firstborn son. It is a testament to how easily fear and manipulation can dismantle the human soul. The day of the sacrifice arrived, and the atmosphere must have been suffocating, thick with the smell of incense and the heavy, terrified silence of a crowd watching a royal execution. The boy, Phrixus, stood on the stone, the blade glinting in the sun, the heat of the fire ready to consume him. It was the end. It was the triumph of Eno's malice. But the ancient world was not a place where secrets stayed hidden from the immortals forever. Nephele, the cloud mother, though cast aside, was watching from the ether. She could not strike the king down, but she could send a rescue, and she sent it in a form so bizarre and magnificent that it stopped the executioners in their tracks. Down from the heavens flew a ram, but this was no ordinary beast of the flock. This was Chrysomalos, a creature of divine biology, possessed of the power of flight and covered not in white wool, but in a fleece of pure, heavy, blinding gold. It was a gift from Hermes or Poseidon, a creature that bridged the gap between the natural and the supernatural. It landed on the altar, its hooves striking the stone, its golden coat shimmering with an otherworldly light that made the sacrificial knives look dull and pathetic by comparison. It did not attack, it knelt. It offered itself as a vehicle of escape. Phrixus grabbed his sister Helle, and together they climbed onto the broad, muscular back of the golden beast. With a powerful thrust of its legs, the ram launched itself into the sky, leaving the king, the wicked stepmother, and the starving city far below. This was not the gentle flight of a dream. This was a terrifying, high-velocity escape into the freezing currents of the upper atmosphere. Imagine clinging to the thick metallic wool of a flying animal, the wind roaring in your ears, the world turning into a patchwork quilt of green and brown far below. They flew east toward the sunrise, toward the distant and mysterious land of Colchis on the edge of the known world. But the myth of Aries is not a fairy tale where everyone survives. It is a lesson in the cost of survival. As they crossed the narrow strait that separates Europe from Asia, the girl, Helle, began to falter. Perhaps the altitude overcame her, or the sheer terror of the flight caused her grip to loosen. Phrixus must have screamed, reaching out for her, but it was too late. She slipped from the golden back and plummeted thousands of feet into the dark waters below. She vanished into the whitecaps, swallowed by the sea that would forever bear her name, the Hellespont. It is a brutal narrative choice by the ancients to have the rescue be successful but stained with the immediate, irreversible loss of a sibling. Phrixus arrived in Colchis alone, traumatized, a refugee with nothing but a divine sheep. And then the story takes its final, strange twist, the one that seals the ram's place in the stars. Upon reaching safety, Phrixus did not keep the ram as a pet or a companion. In a supreme act of pious irony, he sacrificed the golden ram to Zeus. The very creature that had saved him, the creature that had carried him across the world, was slaughtered on the altar of the god who had supposedly demanded Phrixus's own death. It feels wrong to modern sensibilities, a betrayal of the Savior. But to the ancients, this was the highest form of gratitude, returning the divine gift to the divine realm. The ram's spirit ascended to the stars to become the constellation Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, forever marking the spring equinox, the time of new beginnings. But its physical remains, that shimmering golden fleece, stayed on earth. It was hung in a sacred grove, guarded by a sleepless dragon, becoming the ultimate object of desire that would later drive Jason and the Argonauts to their doom. When you look at Aries, you are not just seeing a sheep, you are seeing the symbol of a bold, desperate leap into the unknown, a reminder that every new beginning is purchased with a sacrifice, and that sometimes, to survive, you have to leave everything you love behind and hold on for dear life while the world falls away beneath you. As the great wheel of the sky turns, the ram sets, and a heavier, more ominous shape rises from the eastern horizon. We leave the high-flying heroics of the air and descend into the overwhelming, brute force of the earth. We enter the house of Taurus, the bull. If Aries represents the spark of action and the adrenaline of escape, Taurus represents the undeniable, crushing weight of power and desire. The story of this constellation is one of the most famous and unsettling abductions in mythology, a tale that explores the terrifying lengths a god will go to possess what he craves. It begins not with a war, but with a scene of idyllic peace on the coast of Phoenicia. Europa, a princess of high lineage, was gathering flowers in a meadow near the sea. The sun was warm, the salt air was crisp, and the world seemed safe. But in Greek mythology, safety is often just a prelude to divine intervention. Zeus, the king of the gods, watched her from Olympus. He did not want to woo her with words. He wanted to possess her. But he knew that descending in his full glory would incinerate her, and appearing as a man might frighten her. So he chose a form that embodied physical perfection, quiet strength, and a strange, hypnotic allure. He became a bull. But this was not a beast of the plow, caked in mud and smelling of manure. This was a creature of supernatural beauty. His hide was as white as fresh snow. His horns were polished like gems, and his breath smelled of saffron and roses. He was a masterpiece of biological engineering designed for a single purpose: seduction. He wandered into the meadow, gentle and placid, moving with a heavy, rhythmic grace. The other cattle shied away, sensing the predator beneath the skin. But Europa was entranced. The text describes a moment of fatal curiosity. She approached the great white beast. She stroked his flanks. She wove flowers into his horns. He was so calm, so solid, offering a kind of massive, silent comfort. It was a trap, perfectly baited with beauty. Emboldened by his gentleness, Europa climbed onto his broad back, laughing, perhaps thinking it a playful game. The instant her weight settled on him, the trap snapped shut. The bull did not attack. He simply moved. He turned from the meadow and walked toward the surf. At first, she might have thought he was merely cooling his hooves, but then he kept going. The water rose to his knees, then his chest. He plunged into the deep waves, and suddenly the terrifying reality set in. This was no animal. The bull began to swim with the power of a leviathan, moving faster than any ship. Europa looked back, screaming for her friends, for her father. But the shoreline was receding, shrinking until it was just a thin brown line against the horizon. She was alone in the vast, indifferent Mediterranean, clinging to the neck of a god who had kidnapped her. The ancient mosaics depict this scene with a haunting beauty, her robes fluttering in the wind, the bull's head held high above the waves, the sea stretching out endlessly. It captures the quintessential human fear of being carried away by forces far larger than oneself, the loss of control, the realization that the world is governed by powers that do not respect human boundaries. They crossed the entire sea to the island of Crete, the cradle of civilizations. There, under the shade of ancient plane trees, Zeus shed his bovine disguise and revealed his true form. Europa became the mother of kings, including Minos, who would rule Crete with an iron fist. But the image of the bull did not fade. It haunted the lineage of Crete forever. It was a white bull that Minos refused to sacrifice to Poseidon, leading to the curse that caused his wife, Pasiphae, to fall in lust with a bull, birthing the Minotaur. The shadow of Taurus looms large over this island. It is the symbol of sovereignty, of fertility, but also of a primal, monstrous grandeur that demands submission. When the Greeks placed Taurus in the sky, they depicted only the front half of the animal, the head and the massive shoulders emerging from the darkness, as if the rest of his body were still submerged in the sea, forever swimming toward Crete. To the ancient observers, the rise of Taurus marked a critical shift in the year. The bull is an earth sign, grounded, heavy, enduring. Its arrival heralded the time of plowing, of breaking the soil, of the hard physical labor that sustains civilization. The red star Aldebaran, the eye of the bull, glares down with an intensity that rivals Mars, a watcher in the night. And on the bull's shoulders sits the Pleiades, the seven sisters, a cluster of stars that has been used as an eye test for warriors and a calendar for farmers since the Neolithic age. But beneath the agricultural utility lies the memory of that abduction, the reminder that beauty can be a disguise for power, and that even the most solid ground can be left behind in a heartbeat when the gods decide to move. Taurus stands as a monument to the irresistible force of nature, a force that can carry you across oceans, whether you want to go or not. But where the bull represents a singular, massive, lonely power, the universe requires balance. As the heavy shoulders of Taurus sink into the west, the sky begins to fracture. We leave the realm of the singular beast and enter the domain of duality, of the split soul, of the bond that even death could not sever. The air grows lighter, the wind picks up, and the twins of Gemini rise to tell a story not of conquest, but of a brotherhood that defied the laws of existence itself. But the universe does not allow power to exist without consequence, and as the heavy, singular form of the bull sinks into the Western Ocean, the sky fractures. We leave the realm of the solid earth and ascend into the thin, nervous air of the third house, where the concept of the individual soul is ripped in two. This is Gemini. To the casual observer, it is a cute symbol of twins, perhaps a sign of adaptability or duality. But the origin of this constellation is rooted in a violation of the natural order so profound that it created a family line cursed by beauty and bloodshed. The story begins in the royal bedroom of Sparta with Queen Leda. She was a woman of mortal flesh, but she caught the eye of Zeus, and, as we have learned, the attention of the king of gods is not a blessing. It is a demolition. Zeus did not come to her as a man, nor as a bull. He came as a swan, a great white avian beast that forced itself upon her, creating a union that was biologically impossible and mythologically disastrous. That same night, Leda lay with her mortal husband, King Tyndareus. The result was a pregnancy that defied logic. She birthed eggs. From this tangled genetic web emerged 4 children, split down the middle by fate. 2 were mortal, the children of the king, Clytemnestra and Castor. 2 were divine, the spawn of the swan, Helen, who would one day burn Troy to the ground, and Pollux. Focus your mind on the boys, Castor and Pollux. They were born from the same womb at the same moment, yet they existed in different ontological categories. Pollux was a demigod, invincible, his blood spiked with the ichor of Olympus. Castor was fragile, a man who could bleed, age, and die. Yet they were forged into a single unit of violence and grace. They did not just grow up together, they operated as a single organism. Castor mastered the art of breaking wild horses, tuning his body to the rhythm of galloping beasts. Pollux became the greatest boxer of the age, his fists carrying the weight of thunder. They were the Dioscuri, the youths of Zeus, and they were terrifying. They sailed with the Argonauts, they hunted the Caledonian boar, and they rescued their sister Helen from an early abduction by Theseus, storming the city of Athens and taking the king's mother as a hostage in a ruthless act of reprisal. They were the golden boys of the heroic age, inseparable, moving through the world with the arrogance of those who believe that loyalty can cheat death. But the ancient world was a machine designed to break such bombs. The end came not in a glorious war against monsters, but in a gritty, ugly family feud. The twins fell into a dispute with their cousins, Idas and Lynceus, over the ownership of cattle, or in some darker versions, over the ownership of women. It was a squalid quarrel that exploded into murder. Spears were thrown in the dust. In the chaos of the skirmish, Castor, the mortal brother, was struck down. He fell not as a god falls, but as a man falls, gasping, bleeding, his life leaking into the dirt while his immortal brother watched. Pollux went berserk. He slaughtered the cousins, standing over their broken bodies as the dust settled. But his victory was ashes in his mouth. He turned to Castor and found him cold. And here the tragedy of Gemini reveals its true face. Pollux could not die. He was cursed with eternal life, forced to exist in a universe that no longer contained the other half of his soul. The pain was absolute. It was a grief so potent it threatened to unmake his mind. Pollux looked to the heavens and screamed a prayer to his father, Zeus. He did not ask for vengeance, he begged for death. He pleaded to trade his immortality for the oblivion of the grave, just to be with his brother. Zeus, moved by a love that exceeded even divine understanding, offered a compromise, a bargain that is both a gift and a horror. He would not kill Pollux, but he would allow the brothers to share the immortality. However, the laws of life and death could not be fully broken, only bent. They would spend one day feasting among the gods on Mount Olympus, bathed in golden light, and the next day they would descend together into the gloom of Hades, lying in the suffocating darkness of the underworld, among the weeping shades. Every other day they must die. Every other day they must be resurrected. They became cosmic commuters between heaven and hell, locked in an eternal cycle of funeral and rebirth, proving that the only thing stronger than death is the refusal to let go. When you see the 2 bright stars of Gemini, Castor and Pollux, standing side by side in the winter sky, you are looking at a monument to a loyalty that was willing to endure the grave itself, over and over again for all of eternity. But as the air warms and the year turns toward the solstice, the tragic heroism of the twins fades into the heat haze. The sun climbs to its highest point, reaching the very ceiling of the sky, and then it pauses. This is the solstice, the sun standing, and to mark this moment of hesitation, the ancients placed a creature that moves not forward, but sideways. We enter the dark, wet waters of Cancer, the crab. This is the faintest sign of the zodiac, a constellation often hidden by the glare of the moon, and its story is one of the most pathetic and bizarre episodes in the catalogue of monsters. The setting is the stinking malarial swamps of Lerna, a place where the earth rots and the water creates a mist that chokes the lungs. This was the lair of the Hydra, a biological nightmare with 9 heads, whose blood was a poison so potent that even the fumes could kill a man. Heracles, the great hero, had waded into this muck for his second labor, his boots sinking into the slime, swinging his club at the nest of serpents. But for every head he smashed, 2 more erupted from the bloody stump, a horrifying multiplication of death. The battle was a stalemate of exhaustion and gore. Heracles was gasping for air, blinded by sweat and venom, while his nephew Aeolus frantically ran around with a torch, searing the open wounds to stop the regeneration. And it was in this moment of absolute chaos that Hera, the Queen of Heaven, who hated Heracles with a passion that burned like acid, decided to intervene. She did not send a dragon. She did not send a titan. She sent a crab. Karkanos, a giant crustacean that crawled out of the brackish water with a singular, suicidal mission. It scuttled through the mud, ignored the clash of titans, and clamped its claw onto Heracles' ankle. It is a moment of almost comedic absurdity in the middle of a bloodbath. The hero, distracted, looked down, likely annoyed rather than injured. With a single contemptuous stomp of his heel, Heracles crushed the crab into a paste of shell and meat. That was it. The crab's contribution to the war was a pinch and a crunch. So why is it in the sky? Why is this failed assassin immortalized alongside gods and kings? Because the zodiac is not just a hall of fame for victors, it is a record of obedience. Hera placed the crab in the stars not because it succeeded, but because it tried. It threw itself against a force it could not possibly defeat, simply because it was commanded to do so. It is the patron saint of the underdog, of the futile gesture, of the soldier who holds the line when the outcome is already decided. But Cancer holds a deeper, more mystical secret. Nestled within the faint stars of the crab is a cloudy cluster known as the Praesepe, the manger. To the ancient mystics, this was not just a blur of light, it was the gate of men. They believed that this part of the sky was a cosmic membrane, a portal through which unborn souls descended from the heavens to enter human bodies. While Capricorn, on the opposite side, was the gate of gods, where souls ascended after death. Cancer was the shoot of birth, the beginning of the struggle. It sits there in the summer sky, a quiet, sideways moving guardian of the threshold between the spirit and the flesh, reminding us that life itself begins with a descent into the swamp. And then the swamp dries up. The humidity burns off. The air turns arid and smells of baked dust and crushed thyme. The sun moves from the defensive crouch of the crab into the roaring arrogance of the fire. We arrive at Leo. If Cancer is the sign of the hidden and the sideways, Leo is the sign of the confrontation that happens at high noon. The Nemean lion was not a cat. It was a monster dropped from the moon, a beast with claws sharper than razors, and a hide that was magically impervious to all weapons. It stalked the hills of Nemea, depopulating the region, dragging men from their homes and leaving nothing but silence in its wake. When Heracles arrived to kill it, he did not understand what he was facing. He treated it like a hunt. He tracked the beast to a cave with 2 entrances, a tunnel of limestone that smelled of old blood and rot. Heracles spotted the beast. He drew his bow, a weapon that had felled armies, and loosed an arrow straight at the lion's heart. It should have been a kill shot. Instead, the arrow struck the golden flank and bounced off with a metallic clink, spinning harmlessly into the weeds. He fired again and again. The lion didn't even flinch. It just watched him with eyes that burned like coals, an apex predator realizing that the meat had brought a toothpick. Heracles realized then that technology had failed him. Iron, bronze, wood, they were useless against a creature of this magnitude. He had to become primal. He blocked one entrance of the cave with boulders, trapping himself inside with the monster. He threw down his bow and his sword. He walked into the darkness with nothing but his bare hands. The fight that followed was a claustrophobic nightmare of fur and muscle. The lion lunged, its claws tearing at Heracles' skin. But the hero drove inside the reach, wrapping his massive arms around the lion's throat. It was a battle of asphyxiation. No magic, no tricks, just the brutal application of pressure. Heracles squeezed. The lion thrashed, its claws carving trenches into the hero's back, the cave echoing with the sounds of a struggle that felt like it lasted for days. Slowly, the light faded from the beast's eyes. The breath stopped. The monster was dead. But the labor was not done. Heracles needed the skin as proof, but his knife shattered against the hide. He sat there, covered in sweat and blood, baffled by the corpse he had created. Then a dark inspiration struck him. The only thing that can cut the Nemean lion is the Nemean lion. He took one of the beast's own razor-sharp claws and used it to slice open the belly. He skinned the creature and draped the pelt over his head. The indestructible hide became his armor, the gaping jaws his helmet. He walked out of that cave not just as a man, but as a myth, wearing the face of the death he had conquered. Zeus set the lion in the sky, not to honor the beast, but to mark the moment where humanity learned that sometimes you cannot shoot your problems from a distance. You have to lock the door, step into the dark, and choke them with your own 2 hands. As the adrenaline of the lion hunt fades, the year begins to age. The fierce white heat of high summer softens into a golden, dusty haze, and the frenetic energy of heroes and monsters gives way to a melancholy stillness. We enter the season of harvest, the time of threshing floors and dying light. And here, rising in the east, is the only female figure in the entire zodiac. This is Virgo. To the modern eye, she is often depicted as a simple maiden holding a sheaf of wheat, a symbol of fertility and agriculture. But the Greeks knew her by a different, far heavier name. They called her Astraea, or Dike, the goddess of justice. Her story is not about birth, it is about abandonment. It is a chronicle of the slow, agonizing death of the world's innocence. And her presence in the sky is a monument to the moment the gods finally gave up on humanity. The myth takes us back to the beginning, to the Golden Age, when men lived like gods, without sorrow, toil, or law, because goodness was instinctual. Astrea lived among them, walking the earth, her presence a comforting constant in a world without winter. But time is a corrosive force. The Golden Age rotted into the Silver Age, where men remained children for 100 years and then died in foolish violence. Then came the Bronze Age, hard and brutal, where men loved war for its own sake. And finally, the descent hit rock bottom, the Iron Age. This is the world we recognize, a world of boundaries, of mine and yours, of locked doors and forged signatures. The source text describes this era with chilling specificity. It was the time when guests were turned away from doorways, when brothers fought over inheritance, and when the knife was drawn at the dinner table. The other gods, Zeus, Aries, Poseidon, looked at this festering race of liars and murderers and abandoned the earth in disgust, retreating to the sterile perfection of Olympus. But Astrea stayed. She was the last immortal to linger in the mud of human history. She stood in the marketplaces where merchants shaved weights from their scales. She stood in the courts where judges took bribes. She stood in the fields where neighbors moved boundary stones in the dark. She tried to hold back the tide of entropy with her presence alone, pleading for order, pleading for fairness. But there is a breaking point. The legends say that when she realized the rot was irreversible, when the sound of the world became nothing but the screaming of the victimized and the silence of the complicit, she did not fly away in a rage. She simply walked away. She covered her face, turned her back on the cities of men, and ascended the mountains, step by heavy step, leaving the earth to its own self-destruction. She rose into the night sky, taking her place among the stars. But she took one thing with her, a single ear of wheat, marked by the bright star, Spica. It was a reminder of the harvest, of the fruitfulness that was possible when there was order. Now she looks down from the ecliptic, cool and detached, a permanent witness to the crimes we commit against one another, the celestial exile who loved us enough to stay until the very end, and then left us to the darkness we created. As Astrea fades into the twilight, the sky presents us with a tool. We move from the goddess of justice to the instrument of her trade. Rising next is Libra, the scales. This is the only inanimate object in the entire zodiac, a machine made of stars. It hangs in the sky at the precise point of the autumnal equinox, the single day in the year when the light and the dark are perfectly equal. It is a sign of equilibrium, of the pause between the life of summer and the death of winter. To the Romans, this was the supreme symbol of law and civil order, the balance that keeps the universe from collapsing into chaos. They saw it on the coins of emperors and the friezes of temples. But if you look deeper, past the Roman sanitization, you find a sharper, more violent history hidden in the star names themselves. The Arabs and the Babylonians knew that this region of the sky was not originally a separate tool. It was a theft. These stars once belonged to the constellation that follows it. The two brightest stars in Libra are named Zubin el-Janubi and Zubin esh-Shamali. These are not Latin words for scales. They are Arabic phrases meaning the southern claw and the northern claw. For thousands of years, these stars were the outstretched pincers of the scorpion, reaching across the sky to seize the Virgin. The Romans, obsessed with law and administration, severed the claws and forged them into a set of scales to honor Caesar, civilizing the heavens by turning a weapon into a judge. Yet the energy of the constellation retains that tension. It is the hinge of the year, the moment of judgment. When the sun enters Libra, the harvest is over, the grain is counted, and the debts are called in. It is the cosmic ledger opening up. It asks a terrifyingly simple question. Does your life balance? Have you produced enough to survive the dark? It is a mechanical, unfeeling assessment of worth, hanging there in the autumn sky, reminding us that before the executioner arrives, the judge must sit. And the executioner does arrive. As the scales tip and the nights grow longer than the days, the true darkness rises from the horizon. We enter the domain of the assassin. We enter Scorpio. This is not a subtle sign. It is a visually arresting, sprawling S-curve of stars that looks exactly like the creature it names, complete with a glittering, poisonous tail, hooked, ready to strike. At its heart burns the red supergiant Aries, the rival of Mars, a star that glows with the bloody light of war. The mythology of Scorpio is a grim, cautionary tale about the fatal error of arrogance. It is the story of the hunter Orion, a giant of a man, handsome, powerful, and drunk on his own prowess. Orion was not satisfied with being a great hunter. He wanted to be the only hunter. He stood on the earth and boasted that he would kill every wild beast on the planet, a threat of total ecological genocide. This hubris did not go unnoticed. Gaia, the Earth Mother, the ancient primordial consciousness of the planet, heard this tiny, loud speck threatening her children. She did not send a thunderstorm. She did not send an earthquake. She sent a scorpion, a small, low, creeping thing that hides under rocks. The contrast is the point. Orion was vertical, loud, and massive. The scorpion was horizontal, silent, and small. The duel was brief. There was no epic clash of swords. Orion, striding through the brush, likely never even saw it. He stepped on the wrong patch of earth, and the scorpion struck, a single surgical puncture in the heel. The poison did the rest. The giant fell, his veins burning with a fire that strength could not fight. It was a checkmate by nature. The gods placed both of them in the sky, but they placed them with a specific geometric irony. They are on opposite sides of the celestial sphere. When Scorpio rises in the east, Orion hurriedly sets in the west, fleeing beneath the horizon. For eternity, the great hunter runs from the tiny creature that killed him. It is a warning written in light. No matter how big you are, no matter how strong you are, there is always something smaller, quieter, and more lethal waiting in the dust to take you down. Scorpio rules the time of the year when the leaves rot and the air turns cold. It is the sign of death, of the venom that ends life, but also of the survival instinct stripped to its barest core. It guards the entrance to the Milky Way's darkest rift, staring toward the center of the galaxy with its red, unblinking eye. It tells us that the harvest is done, the judgment has been rendered, and now the executioner walks the land. The sun plunges into the southern hemisphere, the days wither, and we are left to face the long, cold dark. But even in the dark, there is a path. As the scorpion's tail drags the sun down into the underworld, a new figure draws his bow in the south, not to kill a beast, but to aim at the heart of the galaxy itself. We turn now to the centaur, the archer, the keeper of the flame in the winter night. The darkness of the scorpion does not reign forever. As the venom of late autumn seeps into the earth, a new figure rises in the south to hold the line against the encroaching night. This is the pivot point of the year, the moment when the shadows are longest, and humanity needs a guardian who can see in the dark. We turn our eyes to Sagittarius. To the casual observer, this is simply the archer, a centaur drawing a bow. But look closer at the geometry of the heavens. The archer is not aiming into the void. His arrow is pointed directly, unblinkingly, at the glowing red heart of the scorpion, Aries. It is a celestial standoff, frozen in time. The scorpion drags the sun down into the winter death, but the archer stands at the gate of the Milky Way, weapon drawn, ensuring that the beast does not consume the light entirely. The Greeks associated this figure with Crotus, a satyr who lived on Mount Helicon, a creature who invented the rhythmic applause to praise the muses. But the energy of the sign feels older, wilder, akin to Chiron, the wounded healer. It is the synthesis of the beast and the man, the horse's engine of speed and the human mind of calculation. He stands there in the deepest part of the galactic river, a sentinel in the cold, reminding us that when the night is at its most dangerous, you do not hide. You take aim, you prepare. You hold the tension of the string and wait for the perfect moment to release. But as the archer's arrow flies, the year hits its absolute bottom. The sun sinks to its lowest point at the winter solstice, and the world holds its breath. We enter the strange, hybrid waters of Capricorn. This is the most misunderstood image in the zodiac, the sea goat, a creature with the head and forelegs of a mountain goat and the tail of a fish. It sounds like a surrealist joke, a chimera drawn by a madman. But the myth behind it is one of the most terrifying episodes in the history of Olympus. It is the story of the day the gods realized they were not invincible. The monster, Typhon, a chaotic force of nature with 100 dragon heads and a voice that shattered stone, rose from the earth to destroy the Olympian order. He was not just a beast, he was a walking apocalypse. When he charged Olympus, the gods, Zeus, Hermes, Apollo, did not stand and fight. They panicked. They fled to Egypt in a chaotic rout, frantically shape-shifting into animals to hide from the monster's gaze. It was Pan, the goat god of the wild, who found himself trapped between the approaching monster and the river Nile. He could hear the screaming of the wind as Typhon tore the sky apart behind him. Pan scrambled down the bank, his hooves slipping in the mud, terror seizing his chest. He dove into the water just as the monster's shadow fell over him. In his panic, he attempted to change his form, but the transformation was messy and incomplete. The part of him above the water remained a goat, gasping for air, while the part of him submerged in the silt turned into a fish, growing scales and a tail to navigate the current. It was a grotesque, desperate adaptation. But it was this adaptation that saved the cosmos. While the other gods hid, Zeus was cornered and butchered by Typhon, who cut the sinews from the king's hands and feet, leaving him a helpless, boneless sack of meat in a cave. It was the sea-goat, Pan, along with Hermes, who used this strange, amphibious stealth to slip back into the danger zone, stealing back the sinews and restoring Zeus to power. Capricorn is placed in the sky not for its beauty, but for its resourcefulness. It represents the ultimate survival mechanism, the ability to navigate both the earth and the deep water, to climb the highest peak and swim the darkest trench, to do whatever is necessary when the universe itself is trying to kill you. As the crisis of the solstice passes, and the days begin to lengthen by mere minutes, The sky shifts from the frantic struggle of the goat to the eerie, frozen stillness of the water-bearer. This is Aquarius. The figure is a young man, eternally pouring water from a jar into the mouth of a fish. It looks like a pastoral scene, but it is actually a crime scene. The boy is Ganymede, the prince of Troy, a youth of such breathtaking beauty that he doomed himself. He was shepherding his flocks on the slopes of Mount Ida, standing in the soft grass when the sky darkened. Zeus, once again driven by a predatory desire, decided he must possess the boy. He transformed into a massive eagle, a shape that dominates the summer sky as the constellation Aquila, and dove. The abduction was violent and swift. Talons the size of meat hooks gripped the boy's gentle body, lifting him off the earth, his sandals falling to the grass, his dogs barking helplessly at the receding figure. Ganymede was carried to Olympus, stripped of his mortality, and forced into eternal servitude. He became the cupbearer of the gods, pouring nectar into their goblets, a beautiful fixture in a golden cage, forever young, forever serving, while his father down on earth wept for a son who had vanished into the clouds. The constellation captures him in this act of service, tipping the great jar. To the ancients, the stream of water flowing from his vessel was not nectar, but the rains of late winter, the floods that drown the fields and fill the cisterns. It is a sign of cold, heavy abundance, of the waters that sustain life, but also wash it away. He stands there in the lonely stretch of the southern sky, a reminder of the caprice of the gods, who take what they want and leave us only with the rain. Finally, we reach the end of the circle. The journey that began with the golden ram concludes in the deep, silent currents of Pisces, the two fish. Like Capricorn, this sign is born from the terror of Typhon. But the reaction here is different. It is not about fighting back, it is about escaping together. The story places Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and her son Eros on the banks of the Euphrates River. The roar of Typhon was approaching, the ground shaking with the footsteps of the destroyer. Aphrodite knew they could not win. They had to flee into the water. But the river was dark, the current was fast, and the chaos of the transformation could separate them forever. In a moment of maternal desperation, she did not reach for a weapon. She reached for a cord. She took a long ribbon and tied one end to her own wrist and the other to the ankle of her son. It is a small, intimate detail in a landscape of titans and monsters. We will not lose each other. That was the vow. They leaped into the river, their bodies shifting into the silver, slick forms of fish, vanishing into the murky depths. The current battered them, the world above burned, but the cord held. They navigated the darkness, not by sight, but by the tension of the line that bound them. The constellation Pisces commemorates this specific moment, not the fish themselves, but the knot. The star Alresha, which means the cord, sits at the point where the two ribbons meet, holding the two fish together across the vast emptiness of space. It is the final message of the zodiac. When all else fails, when the monsters rise and the gods flee and the earth dissolves, the only thing that survives is the connection we forge with one another. The circle ends not with a conquest, but with a bond that refuses to break. The wheel has turned. We have walked the ecliptic from the sacrificial ram to the escaping fish, and now we must step back and look at the whole terrifying picture. We treat the zodiac today like a horoscope, a way to ask, what will happen to me? But the ancients did not build this machine to tell your fortune. They built it to preserve their trauma. Look at the sky again. Really look at it. What do you see? You see a child sacrificed by his father. You see a woman kidnapped by a bull. You see a brother begging for death because he cannot bear to live alone. You see a hero crushing a crab that was just following orders. You see a mother tying herself to her son so they don't drown in the dark. The zodiac is not a promise of destiny. It is a graveyard of the things we have lost. It is a cosmic gallery of betrayals, abductions, and last stands. The ancients looked up and saw that the universe was vast, cold, and indifferent to their suffering. So they took their deepest scars and pinned them to the ceiling of the world. They turned their pain into constellations so that their suffering would at least have a shape, a name, and a story. And here we are, thousands of years later, still looking at the same scars, still asking the stars for answers, still hoping that the cold geometry of the night cares about our small, fragile lives. But perhaps there is a hidden mercy in this dark archive. The message of the stars isn't that you will be rich or loved or lucky. The message is that you are not the first to be afraid. You are not the first to lose a brother, to flee a monster, or to be forced into a life you didn't choose. The sky is a mirror of the human condition in all its brutality and beauty. So, tonight, when you go outside and feel that familiar pull to look up, ask yourself the question that the ancients whispered in the dark. Do you choose to see the monsters that hunt you, or do you choose to see the cord that binds you to the ones you love? The monsters are eternal, but so is the knot.